Imagine walking into the biggest charity gala of the year, everything perfectly planned. The room was sparkling with chandeliers, the air buzzing with chatter, and the most influential people in the city were there. I had spent weeks preparing for this night, making sure my dress, hair, and speech were flawless. I wanted everything to go perfectly, but I never expected the humiliation that was about to hit me. Margaret, my mother-in-law, had been watching me closely for months. Elegant and poised, she had a way of making people feel small without raising her voice. But that night, in front of hundreds of guests, she decided to take it to another level. As I walked across the stage to present a small award, she leaned into the microphone and began speaking. Her words were meant to be a compliment, but every line was loaded with sarcasm. She suggested that my achievements were minor, that I was inexperienced, and implied that I was only there because of my marriage to her son, Daniel. I felt the room shift. People's eyes turned toward me, some polite, some sympathetic, others curious. My stomach dropped, my face burning with embarrassment. I wanted to disappear. I wanted to run out of the room and never return. But I stayed. I kept my composure, smiled, and tried to act as if nothing had happened. Inside, though, anger was rising. How could someone be so cruel, so manipulative, in front of everyone? Daniel noticed the tension but stayed silent. Margaret had him wrapped around her finger, and I realized that speaking up in the moment would only make things worse. I had to think carefully, plan carefully. As I returned to my seat, I kept replaying her words in my head. Every insult, every thinly veiled jab was sharp and cutting. Yet, despite the humiliation, I also felt a strange sense of clarity. I knew that Margaret's arrogance would be her downfall one day. I had seen hints of her secret dealings with the charity, suspicious expenses and unexplained transfers that didn't add up. That thought gave me strength. I wasn't powerless. I had proof, and I had patience. The gala continued, but I moved through the night differently. I smiled politely, answered questions, and pretended nothing had happened, but inside, a plan was forming. Margaret might have thought she won tonight, but the truth had a way of coming out, and I had it safely in my hands. Every laugh she drew from the audience fueled my determination. By the time the evening ended, the humiliation had passed, but my resolve had solidified. I promised myself that this wasn't over. Margaret's public display of cruelty would not go unanswered. I would remain calm, strategic, and focused. And one day, the people she had fooled would see her for who she really was. That night, walking out of the gala, I felt a mixture of shame, anger, and determination. Margaret might have had the spotlight for a moment, but I held something much more powerful: truth, patience, and the knowledge that her time was coming. Samantha Reynolds had been married to Daniel Whitman for just over a year. Daniel was charming, kind, and devoted, but there was one problem. His loyalty to his mother, Margaret, often came before anything else. From the very beginning, it was clear that Daniel valued his mother's opinion above his wife's. He would brush off minor conflicts, dismiss my concerns, and assure me that Margaret meant well, even when her actions were hurtful. Margaret, elegant and commanding, had a way of controlling every situation without anyone noticing. She rarely confronted me directly, but her words and gestures often carried subtle digs. At family dinners, she would casually mention how inexperienced I was in organizing events, or compare my achievements to women she admired. At first, I tried to ignore it, telling myself that her behavior came from pride and overprotectiveness toward her son. But over time, the digs grew sharper, and it became clear that Margaret was actively undermining me behind the scenes. Samantha worked hard in her career, dedicating herself to the nonprofit sector. She had built a solid reputation as an event coordinator, trusted by clients and colleagues alike. Yet every accomplishment seemed to be minimized in Margaret's eyes. Even when donors or board members praised Samantha's work, Margaret had a comment ready that subtly suggested I didn't deserve the credit. The constant scrutiny started to weigh heavily on Samantha, chipping away at her confidence bit by bit. On top of the family tensions, Samantha had begun noticing something unusual with the charity that Margaret had long championed. While helping with event planning and logistics, she stumbled across discrepancies in financial records. Large sums that didn't make sense, missing receipts, and donations that weren't accounted for properly. At first, Samantha hesitated to draw conclusions. Maybe it was a clerical error, she thought. But the more she looked, the more the irregularities added up, painting a picture of potential wrongdoing. These discoveries added a new layer of stress. Samantha felt torn. On one hand, she wanted to maintain her dignity and avoid confrontation with Margaret and Daniel. On the other, she couldn't ignore what she had seen. Each day, the emotional strain grew. She wanted to protect her marriage, preserve her reputation, and continue her work in the nonprofit world. But Margaret's constant manipulation and the shadow of potential fraud made it increasingly difficult. Samantha often found herself questioning her own instincts. She wondered if she was overreacting, if she was misreading situations, or if she should confront Margaret directly. But the subtle undermining and the discrepancies she had found left her no choice but to tread carefully. Every move had to be deliberate, every word measured, because one wrong step could cost her everything she had worked for. Despite the tension, Samantha remained determined. She knew she couldn't allow Margaret to continue controlling the narrative or hiding questionable actions. The emotional struggle was intense, but it strengthened her resolve. Samantha realized that maintaining her dignity wasn't about avoiding conflict. It was about being smart, patient, and ready to act when the time was right. About a month before the gala, Samantha attended another major charity event, one that Margaret had been promoting for months. Everything was grand. The room was filled with influential donors, media personnel, and city leaders. While everyone was busy celebrating, Samantha's eyes were drawn to some documents accidentally left on a table in the charity office. Curiosity got the better of her, and she quietly glanced through them. What she found made her heart sink. The financial statements showed unexplained transfers and missing amounts. As she dug deeper, it became clear that nearly $200,000 from the charity's funds had been siphoned off. The numbers didn't lie. It was a clear sign of embezzlement, and all roads seemed to lead to Margaret. Samantha felt a rush of disbelief mixed with anger. How could someone so polished and respected manipulate the charity she had worked to support? After the gala, Samantha couldn't hold it in. She decided to speak to Daniel privately, hoping he would see the truth and stand with her. Sitting together in their quiet living room, she explained what she had found, showing him the documents and pointing out the inconsistencies. She hoped he would understand the seriousness of the situation. But Daniel's reaction crushed her. "I don't believe this, Sam," he said firmly. "Mom has done so much for the charity. She wouldn't steal money. Maybe you're misunderstanding something." His words felt like a wall between them. Samantha felt her chest tighten. She had expected shock, maybe even outrage, but not doubt. The person she trusted most couldn't see what was right in front of him. It was as if she were alone in this, and the weight of the truth pressed down harder than ever. That night, Samantha wrestled with her feelings. She loved Daniel and wanted to protect their marriage, but she couldn't ignore what she had discovered. Margaret's betrayal went beyond petty insults or emotional manipulation. This was serious, and innocent people's money was at stake. The conflict tore at her. Should she confront Margaret directly and risk tearing her family apart? Or should she gather evidence quietly, waiting for the right moment to act? By the next morning, Samantha had made a decision. She would not alert Margaret. She would collect proof methodically and discreetly, making sure every piece of evidence was irrefutable. Her plan wasn't about revenge yet, it was about being prepared. Margaret had humiliated her publicly before, and now Samantha would have the power to expose the truth on her own terms. This silent preparation gave Samantha a strange sense of control. She could no longer rely on Daniel to see what she saw, and she couldn't trust Margaret in any situation. The betrayal ran deep, but it also sparked a determination inside her. She would protect her integrity, and when the time was right, she would reveal everything. Margaret might have felt untouchable, but Samantha was quietly building the foundation to ensure justice would be served. The isolation was painful, but it strengthened her resolve. She realized that patience, careful planning, and gathering solid evidence would be far more powerful than confrontation or anger. Margaret had no idea what was coming. Samantha knew she couldn't act without proof. Margaret was careful and polished, and any false move could ruin everything. She decided to track her mother-in-law's financial activities quietly, watching for patterns and inconsistencies that would confirm what she already suspected. Every donation, every transfer, every document became part of a bigger picture she needed to complete. For weeks, Samantha spent hours going through charity reports, budgets, and statements, making careful notes. She noticed how some large sums went unaccounted for, and how certain invoices seemed manipulated. Margaret appeared charming in public, but behind the scenes, Samantha could see the cracks forming. The more she discovered, the more certain she became that Margaret had been siphoning money for personal use. The breakthrough came during a routine charity office meeting. Margaret had stepped out briefly, and the staff left files unattended on the table. Samantha's hands shook slightly as she picked up the documents. She had brought a small USB with her, planning to copy the files without leaving a trace. The risk was immense. One wrong move, one glance from a colleague or Margaret herself, could expose her and blow her carefully laid plan. Samantha's heart raced as she quickly and quietly copied the documents onto the USB. Every second felt like an eternity, every shadow or sound making her jump. She could feel the tension tightening around her chest, but she focused on the task. The files contained exactly what she needed: detailed records of transfers, missing receipts, and notes that directly implicated Margaret in diverting the $200,000. The weight of the evidence was heavy in her hands, but it also gave her a sense of power she hadn't felt before. Once the copying was done, Samantha slipped the USB safely into her purse, hiding it as casually as possible. She told herself to stay calm, to act normally, and to avoid suspicion. Every interaction for the rest of the day felt amplified. Even casual comments from colleagues seemed like potential threats. But Samantha stayed composed, reminding herself that patience and timing were critical. Acting too soon could destroy everything she had worked for. That evening, Samantha sat alone in her apartment, reviewing what she had gathered. The documents were clear, undeniable. Every number, every note built a picture of Margaret's wrongdoing. But Samantha also reminded herself that having evidence was not the same as exposing her. She needed to choose the moment carefully to ensure that when the truth came out, it would be decisive and public, leaving no room for doubt or denial. Samantha felt a mix of fear and determination. Fear of being caught, fear of damaging her marriage, and fear of the confrontation that would eventually come. Yet determination outweighed it all. She had the proof, and she had a plan. Margaret might think she was untouchable, but Samantha had quietly taken control. She vowed to use the evidence wisely, ensuring that every step she took would lead to justice, and finally, the reckoning Margaret deserved. By the end of the night, Samantha felt a strange calm. The hardest part was behind her. Now, it was a matter of patience, strategy, and waiting for the perfect time to act. The night of the gala arrived, and Margaret had spared no expense. The ballroom sparkled with crystal chandeliers, the tables were covered in white silk, and every detail screamed elegance. Guests in tuxedos and evening gowns moved gracefully across the floor, mingling and sipping champagne. The event was meant to celebrate the charity's success, but Samantha knew better. Samantha walked into the room with a mix of nerves and determination. She had attended galas before, but this one felt different. She could sense Margaret's energy immediately, commanding, poised, and ready to dominate the room. Samantha knew what was coming. Her mother-in-law had always used these gatherings as stages to belittle her quietly, and tonight would likely be no exception. As she moved through the crowd, Samantha kept her eyes on Margaret. She noticed subtle things she hadn't seen before. A few donors exchanging glances, whispers that stopped when Margaret looked their way. It was as if some of the guests already sensed that not everything was as perfect as it seemed. Samantha's heart raced at the thought. She realized she wasn't the only one who had noticed something unusual. Every step Samantha took was careful. She smiled politely, exchanged greetings, and nodded to familiar faces, all while keeping her focus on her mother-in-law. Fear bubbled in her chest. Fear of public humiliation, fear of confrontation, fear that tonight might spiral out of control. But beneath the fear, anger and determination grew. Margaret had humiliated her before, manipulated her, and betrayed the trust of countless donors. Samantha wanted this night to be different. As Margaret gave a short speech welcoming the guests, Samantha noticed the pride in her mother-in-law's voice. But it was also forced, strained in places. Margaret didn't know Samantha had been quietly preparing for this moment. The USB with the evidence rested safely in Samantha's purse, a small but powerful reminder that she had control, even in this tense room. Samantha felt her pulse quicken with anticipation. Every laugh, every clap, every congratulatory nod that Margaret received reminded her of what was at stake. She had to stay composed, because exposing Margaret too soon could backfire. Timing would be crucial, and Samantha had learned the hard way that patience was her greatest ally. As the evening continued, Samantha moved among the guests, catching more curious looks and small gestures that suggested suspicion. Each one gave her confidence. Margaret might have believed she controlled the room, but there were cracks in her armor. Samantha felt a mix of fear, anger, and exhilaration. The stage was set, the evidence was ready, and the moment she had been preparing for was approaching. By the end of the evening, Samantha understood one thing clearly. Margaret's perfect image was not as untouchable as she thought. The gala, meant to display success and control, had become a silent battlefield. Samantha was ready, patient, and determined. The truth would come out, and tonight was only the beginning of what was to follow. The moment everyone had been waiting for came. Margaret took the stage to introduce the next part of the gala. Her voice was smooth and confident, commanding attention as usual. Then, with a slight smile, she turned her words toward Samantha. "You know," Margaret said, her tone casual but sharp, "planning these events isn't easy. Some people try hard, but they just don't quite get it. Isn't that right, Samantha?" She let the question hang in the air, clearly expecting a laugh from the crowd. A hush fell over the room. Guests glanced around, some whispering to each other, others staring directly at Samantha. Her cheeks burned, and she felt a tight knot in her stomach. The subtle mockery was clear to everyone. Her work, her effort, and her accomplishments were being dismissed in front of hundreds of people. Samantha wanted to respond, to defend herself, but she knew any reaction could escalate the situation. Sitting there, Samantha took a deep breath. She could feel the anger building, hot and consuming, but she reminded herself to stay calm. Margaret had done this before, always trying to provoke her, always trying to make her look small. Samantha refused to give her that satisfaction. Every word Margaret spoke, every glance toward the audience, fueled her determination. This humiliation wasn't the end. It was just part of a bigger plan. Her mind raced as she reflected on everything she had uncovered over the past weeks. The documents she had copied, the patterns she had noticed, and the proof of Margaret's wrongdoing. All of it sat safely in her clutch, hidden from view. The USB was small, unassuming, but it held the key to exposing the truth. The thought of it gave Samantha a quiet sense of power, balancing the embarrassment she felt in that moment. Margaret continued, praising other team members and subtly comparing their skills to Samantha's. Each comment was like a pinprick, but Samantha focused on her breathing, grounding herself in the knowledge that she was prepared. She reminded herself that humiliation could be temporary, but the truth was permanent. Margaret could control the narrative for now, but she couldn't hide forever. As the applause died down, Samantha smiled politely, nodded to Margaret, and returned to her seat. Inside, her heart was racing, not with fear, but with anticipation. Every whisper, every glance, every judgmental eye in the room reminded her why she had gathered the evidence and why patience mattered. The night had confirmed one thing. Margaret underestimated her, and that was a mistake she would regret. Even as the gala continued around her, Samantha felt a quiet confidence building. The embarrassment stung, but it also fueled her. She wasn't powerless. The USB in her clutch was more than just a device. It was a symbol of justice waiting to be served. Margaret's public show of superiority had only strengthened Samantha's resolve. Tonight she had endured, but soon the tables would turn. After the gala, Samantha felt a mix of relief and determination. The public humiliation had passed, but she knew the night wasn't over. Margaret believed she had won, but Samantha had quietly carried the power with her all along. She decided it was time to take the first careful steps toward justice. Samantha reached out to a few trusted donors she knew well, people who had always supported the charity and its mission. She arranged private meetings over the next several days, keeping everything discreet. In each meeting, she remained calm and professional, presenting herself as concerned rather than confrontational. When the moment felt right, Samantha connected her USB to a laptop and showed the donors the documents she had collected. Every spreadsheet, every transfer record, and every note painted a clear picture of Margaret's misappropriation of $200,000 from the charity. The evidence was undeniable, and the donors' reactions reflected it. Some gasped, others exchanged worried glances, and a few whispered in disbelief. Samantha watched silently, feeling a strange mix of anxiety and satisfaction. For the first time, Samantha felt empowered. The fear and embarrassment that had haunted her during the gala were replaced by control and purpose. She had endured Margaret's cruelty, gathered proof, and was now sharing the truth strategically. This wasn't revenge in anger or shouting. It was quiet, deliberate, and effective. Margaret, who had humiliated her in front of hundreds, had no idea what was happening behind the scenes. Each meeting reinforced Samantha's sense of justice. The donors were shocked but grateful for her honesty. They asked questions, and Samantha answered carefully, making sure the evidence spoke for itself. She didn't need to exaggerate or attack Margaret personally. The numbers and documents were enough. She could feel the shift happening. The people who once admired Margaret were starting to question her. Meanwhile, Margaret remained blissfully unaware. She continued her daily life, believing that Samantha had been embarrassed and silenced. She smiled at social events, greeted donors, and acted as if everything was normal. But Samantha knew better. Behind the scenes, the truth was already spreading, and Margaret's carefully curated image was beginning to crack. Samantha felt a quiet satisfaction. She didn't gloat or rush the process. Instead, she let patience guide her. This methodical approach made her feel stronger than she ever had. She realized that the most powerful revenge wasn't confrontation or shouting. It was holding the evidence, knowing the truth, and letting the right people see it at the right time. By the end of the week, Samantha had shared the documents with everyone necessary, ensuring the charity's board and key donors were fully aware of Margaret's actions. Each time she did, she felt more in control, more confident, and more vindicated. Margaret may have humiliated her publicly, but Samantha had the upper hand in the most important way: truth, proof, and patience. For the first time, Samantha could breathe without fear. She had turned humiliation into power, and the quiet revenge she had planned was already in motion. Margaret had no idea what was coming, and that thought alone made Samantha feel stronger, more focused, and ready for the next step. The aftermath of Samantha's careful actions began to unfold slowly but surely. The donors she had confided in didn't stay silent. Within days, they started questioning Margaret openly, asking pointed questions about the missing funds and the unusual transactions. The once trusted image of Margaret as a charitable and flawless organizer began to crumble under the weight of scrutiny. At first, Margaret tried to deflect and charm her way through the questions. She smiled politely, gave vague answers, and hoped the issue would fade. But the evidence Samantha had provided was clear, undeniable, and organized. Donors pressed for details, demanded explanations, and began withholding support until they got answers. Margaret's control over the charity was slipping, and she could feel it. Her social circle, previously loyal and admiring, started to distance themselves. Friends, colleagues, and influential contacts began questioning her motives, whispering doubts behind closed doors. Invitations to events dwindled, and those who once praised her publicly now avoided her. The isolation that Margaret had never experienced before was settling in, a quiet but growing consequence of her actions. Meanwhile, Daniel faced a storm of emotions. When he learned the extent of his mother's wrongdoing, he was stunned. He had trusted her implicitly, believing in her generosity and reputation. The shock of betrayal left him struggling to reconcile his loyalty to his mother with the reality of her actions. He confronted Samantha privately, full of guilt and confusion, realizing that she had been right all along. For the first time, he saw his mother as manipulative and deceitful, and the truth hit him harder than he could have imagined. Samantha observed all of this quietly. She didn't gloat or seek revenge in words. Instead, she felt a profound sense of relief. The power dynamic had shifted. Margaret, who had publicly humiliated her and controlled her husband's loyalty, was now exposed. The donors were demanding accountability, her social circle had turned against her, and the legal implications of her actions were beginning to surface. Samantha's careful planning had worked. Yet, amid the satisfaction, there was a lingering sadness. This was still her family, Daniel's mother, the woman who had once been part of their lives. The betrayal was deep, and the emotional cost of exposing it weighed on her. Even though justice was being served, Samantha felt a quiet grief for the relationship that could never be the same. Watching from a distance, Samantha allowed herself a moment to breathe. She had endured public humiliation, gathered evidence, and handled the fallout with patience and intelligence. The satisfaction of seeing the truth revealed blended with the sadness of broken trust. Margaret's world was unraveling, and Samantha's quiet, calculated actions had brought her a sense of empowerment she had never felt before. For the first time in months, Samantha felt a balance of emotions: justice for the betrayal, relief that the truth was known, and the heavy realization that family ties had been irreparably damaged. She understood that some victories came with a cost, and she was ready to face it with dignity. After the fallout settled, Samantha spent quiet moments reflecting on everything that had happened. The weeks of tension, planning, and careful observation had finally led to the truth being revealed. She thought about the humiliation she endured at the gala, the emotional strain of dealing with Margaret, and the constant doubts she had faced from Daniel. Despite all of it, one thing stood out: her dignity had remained intact. She had not lashed out, had not lost control, and had handled the situation with patience and care. Samantha felt a strong sense of triumph. She had taken what could have been a humiliating, powerless experience and turned it into a calculated strategy that exposed wrongdoing and held the responsible party accountable. The satisfaction of knowing the truth was finally out, that the donors and the charity board now understood what had been happening, was empowering. It wasn't revenge in the loud or angry sense. It was smart, careful, and effective. At the same time, Samantha felt a deep ache. The people she had trusted most, her husband and his mother, had betrayed her in ways she hadn't expected. Daniel's inability to see the truth sooner, his loyalty to his mother above all else, left a scar. The broken trust was hard to accept. She loved Daniel and had hoped for a family she could rely on, but she realized that some bonds, once tested and broken, could never fully heal. The heartbreak mingled with the sense of accomplishment, creating a complex mix of emotions that Samantha had to face alone. Through it all, she learned something important about power and revenge. She realized that true strength wasn't in shouting, embarrassing, or publicly attacking someone who had wronged her. Strength was in patience, careful planning, and timing. It was in using intelligence to achieve justice without compromising one's values or dignity. The lessons she had learned from the ordeal extended beyond this one conflict. They were life lessons she would carry forward in every challenge she faced. Samantha also reflected on her own resilience. She had felt isolated, afraid, and overwhelmed at times, but she had never given up. Her ability to stay calm under pressure, to gather evidence carefully, and to act strategically had shown her a side of herself she hadn't fully recognized before. She understood now that her power didn't come from confrontation or anger. It came from clarity, preparation, and self-control. In the quiet moments after everything was settled, Samantha felt a mixture of emotions: pride, relief, sadness, and empowerment. She had endured betrayal, humiliation, and doubt, yet she had emerged stronger. Her dignity remained unshaken. Justice had been served, and she had done it on her own terms. The experience left her wiser and more confident, knowing that patience, intelligence, and calm determination could achieve more than any moment of public confrontation ever could. Samantha finally felt at peace with the outcome. The ordeal had been painful, but it had also been transformative. She had learned to trust her instincts, value her patience, and recognize that quiet strength often speaks louder than the loudest words. In the weeks and months after Margaret's wrongdoing was exposed, Samantha focused on moving forward. She poured herself into her nonprofit work, determined to restore her focus and energy to the mission she cared about. Each event she organized, each donor she met, and every new project she took on was done with renewed purpose and integrity. She refused to let past humiliation or betrayal define her work or her future. Daniel, after confronting the full truth about his mother, approached Samantha with a heartfelt apology. He admitted that he had been blind to Margaret's manipulation and expressed regret for doubting her when she had raised concerns. It wasn't an easy conversation, and rebuilding trust took time, but it marked a turning point in their relationship. Daniel began to see Samantha not just as his wife, but as a strong, intelligent, and capable partner who could handle challenges with wisdom and patience. Meanwhile, Margaret's influence continued to wane. Her social network, once extensive and devoted, had begun to distance itself from her. Donors demanded accountability, former friends and colleagues avoided her, and her reputation suffered. She had once been untouchable, but the truth had caught up with her, leaving her isolated and facing the consequences of her actions. Samantha observed all of this quietly, without gloating. The process had unfolded naturally, and seeing life correct itself felt more satisfying than any confrontation could have. As Samantha rebuilt her personal and professional life, she reflected on the lessons she had learned. She realized that revenge didn't have to be loud or aggressive. True power came from careful planning, patience, and letting the truth speak for itself. Margaret's arrogance and deceit had been exposed, not through shouting or confrontation, but through Samantha's quiet intelligence and steadfast approach. This gave her a deep sense of satisfaction and confidence that no public humiliation could ever take away. Samantha also grew stronger in her own sense of self. The betrayal, humiliation, and challenges she had faced had tested her in ways she never expected. but she emerged wiser and more resilient. She understood the value of patience, the importance of integrity, and the power of acting strategically. Her professional reputation flourished, and colleagues and donors alike recognized her competence, dedication, and moral strength. Life began to feel balanced again. Samantha had reclaimed control over her career, her marriage, and her personal dignity. She no longer carried the fear or anxiety that had shadowed her during Margaret's schemes. Instead, she moved with confidence, knowing she could handle any challenge with grace and intelligence. Reflecting on everything, Samantha knew that the best form of revenge wasn't humiliation or anger. It was quietly exposing the truth, staying patient, and allowing life to reveal the reality of a situation. In doing so, she had not only achieved justice, but had also strengthened her own character. Samantha emerged from the ordeal respected, empowered, and ready for a future shaped by her own choices, not by the manipulations of others.